They say Switzerland is neutral. Alpine peaks, alpine air, chocolate, and watches. But behind that pristine image lies a financial empire, built partly on the unspoken business of laundering dirty money. There is a giant, nearly invisible banking system that has profited from secrecy, trusts, numbered accounts, and the complicity of silence. This is the story of how one nation's banking infrastructure became entwined with global crime, corruption, and power, how hidden funds flowed through Swiss vaults, and how that helped build both fortune and impunity. Before it begins, I want you to tell me in the comments, which country are you watching this from, and what time is it where you are? Because this isn't distant history. It's happening now. If you care about truth, subscribe. In the 19th century, Switzerland's banking laws were simple but firm and suspiciously silent. As industrialization and colonial corruption spread, people with questionable fortunes looked for sanctuaries. Switzerland offered them that sanctuary. Discreet Swiss banks promised confidentiality. Bankers believed in discretion as a virtue. Numbered accounts, minimal questions. Trust. Those were the selling points. As Europe fractured in wars and revolutions, fleeing monarchs and corrupt officials deposited treasure in Swiss banks, some of it legit, some of it ill-gotten. By the mid-20th century, this discreet reputation was firmly established. After World War II, many Nazi officials and collaborators sought safe havens. Artwork, gold, valuables. They hid many of them in Swiss vaults. Many Swiss banks accepted them, often turning a blind eye to origin in return for large deposits and beneficial fees. Swiss neutrality gave plausible deniability. Swiss bankers argued they didn't ask because neutrality demanded non-interference, but that silence had cost. The money came anyway, and vaults filled. As decades passed, Swiss laws evolved. Banking secrecy encoded in law, financial privacy protected vigorously. This benefit attracted more money from all corners. Drug traffickers, dictators, kleptocrats. In Latin America, Africa, and Asia, corrupt elites moved funds out of reach of oversight. Often they didn't invest in their home countries. They bought villas in Geneva or luxury apartments in Zurich, all through invisible channels. Shell companies, trusts, numbered accounts. The Swiss giant grew fat on commissions, investments, and foreign deposits it never publicly apologized for. By the 1970s and 80s, the global pressure to address dirty money rose. US and UK authorities began investigating money laundering across borders. Switzerland responded with incremental reforms. Laws were passed, reporting requirements came, but the structure was already entrenched. Banking secrecy remained a core piece of Swiss identity. Banks continued to serve clients with dubious funds, as long as paperwork was in order. Secrecy didn't vanish, it adapted. One of the most striking scandals was in the 1990s. Russian oligarchs, post-Soviet corruption, and the sudden accumulation of wealth. Many such fortunes ended up parked in Swiss banks. With the collapse of the Soviet system, dirty money flowed out, leaving Russia with inequality and Swiss cities with influxes of capital. The Swiss giant didn't ask too many questions. The money arrived. Investments followed, real estate soared, and Swiss finance reaped the profits, not from industry or exports, but from global inequality and secrecy. Since 2000, global anti-money laundering laws tightened. The Financial Action Task Force, FATF, demanded transparency. Swiss banks began disclosing beneficial owners in limited cases. Compliance departments became a thing. But the core business remained. Dirty money didn't evaporate. It deepened the shadow networks. The rich and the corrupt found ever more sophisticated ways. Offshore trusts, third-country intermediaries, cryptocurrency mixers. Swiss banks adapted tools. Due diligence could be outsourced. Paperwork could be faked. Beneficial owners could hide behind anonymous corporations. The empire shifted, but it did not shrink. The complexity increased. Swiss banks began offering wealth management for clients who needed to move money legally, tax planning, inheritance trusts, multi-jurisdiction portfolios. But many of those same tools doubled as channels for illicit transfer, sometimes through loopholes, secrecy in ownership, non-cooperation with foreign courts, slow or partial compliance with requests for information. Clients from sanctioned countries transferred assets, sometimes with assistance from local intermediaries. Properties in Swiss cities, luxury goods, high-end art, all silently purchased with wealth often built in corruption or crime. Every client that deposited dirty money paid fees. Every salary paid to bankers, every building built in Zurich, every luxury hotel room booked. All were downstream in the wealth generated by secrecy. This created not just profit, but power. Politicians of Switzerland benefited. Real estate developers benefited. Swiss institutions grew dependent on wealth flowing in. The economy of finance, not of manufacturing, came to define Swiss prosperity. For many decades, Swiss financial regulation lagged. The incentives to maintain secrecy were deep and broad. Resist too much transparency, and international clients might flee. So insulated sectors resisted reform. But in 2008 and after, pressure increased. Currency crises, global financial scandals, money laundering from Latin America, from Russian and African kleptocrats, from Middle East regimes led to public outcry. Swiss banks agreed to cooperate more with international tax authorities. They signed bilateral transparency agreements. They began automatically exchanging information under OECD treaties. Some banks were fined, some bankers investigated. Yet each scandal taught a lesson. Dirty money is profitable enough to withstand risk. Fines are simply cost of business. By 2020, leaked data, Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, Zimbabwe leaks, revealed the vastness of Swiss involvement in offshore schemes. Beneficial owners from warlords, sanctioned individuals, tax cheats, their identities hidden, their money parked. The Swiss giant had built an infrastructure for invisibility, and as global norms shift toward transparency, much of that infrastructure remains useful. Shell companies in other countries can obscure origin. Swiss banks can process transactions via intermediaries. Foreign law enforcement often blocked or delayed. The pillar of secrecy remains. The giant's empire is not built on the honest exchange of value, but on extracting value from asymmetry of information. Those who have illicit funds, or funds not clean under public scrutiny, can gain access to global investment, luxury power, while those without such funds cannot. The Swiss financial system becomes a mechanism of protection. Protection from oversight, protection from consequence, protection from justice. And that makes the Swiss giant not just a bank, but a structure of global impunity. But there's a cost. Reputation, international standing, diplomatic strain. Switzerland has increasingly faced investigations and demands for accountability. Some reforms have raised the cost of doing dirty money business. Banks now invest heavily in compliance software, know your customer protocols, anti-money laundering divisions. Employees are trained. Suspicious transactions must be reported. But each new rule met resistance. Secrecy is defended as privacy. The right to financial privacy is argued. And sometimes laws are watered down, delayed, or subverted. Money laundering didn't stop. It transformed. Where once cash might be deposited directly, now it might be transferred through cryptocurrency, through real estate, through art. Where once Swiss anonymity was absolute, now clients use layers of trust companies in other countries, trusts within trusts, etc. The Swiss giant's empire is adapting. It innovates in shadows. It protects in complexity. One of the most revealing ways to understand the Swiss banking empire is through stories of individuals and nations that relied on it. During the Cold War, dictators from Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East stashed billions in Swiss accounts. Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines, Jean-Claude Duvalier of Haiti, each plundered their country's treasury, then hid the stolen money in Switzerland. When these regimes collapsed, their citizens were left with poverty, inflation, and debt. The stolen wealth sat frozen in Zurich or Geneva, protected by strict banking secrecy. Governments seeking repatriation faced years of legal battles, often recovering only a fraction. The Swiss system claimed neutrality, but neutrality became complicity when it shielded stolen money from justice. When Mobutu died in 1997, investigators discovered hundreds of millions hidden abroad, much of it in Swiss banks. The people of Congo never saw that money again. The same pattern repeated across continents. Dictators looted, citizens suffered, Swiss institutions profited. In many cases, local development projects halted because budgets were drained. Hospitals never built, schools left unfinished, but bankers continued earning fees. In this sense, Switzerland became a silent partner in global inequality. It didn't create corruption, but provided the perfect vault for its proceeds. Swiss secrecy wasn't only about dictators. Organized crime also found it convenient. Drug cartels in the 1980s needed a way to launder profits from cocaine. Cash was heavy, risky to move. Swiss banks offered private accounts through intermediaries. Layers of shell corporations in Panama or Liechtenstein disguised the origins. By the time funds entered Switzerland, paperwork looked legitimate. The banks turned a profit, drug lords gained legitimacy, and criminal empires expanded. Authorities occasionally caught smaller offenders, but the system's architecture remained intact. Too much money depended on it. In 1998, after decades of criticism, Switzerland agreed to create the Swiss Bankers Association Code of Conduct. It sounded reformist, but implementation was selective. Banks promised due diligence, yet compliance was often symbolic. Real scrutiny threatened profits. Whistleblowers who spoke out faced retaliation. Rudolf Elmer, a Swiss banker who exposed tax evasion practices, was prosecuted for breaching secrecy laws. Protecting the system mattered more than exposing wrongdoing. The law punished those who told the truth, not those who hid the money. As global scrutiny intensified, Swiss institutions shifted focus. They began branding themselves as wealth management specialists. The pitch changed from secrecy to sophistication, yet much of the underlying practice remained similar, helping wealthy individuals move and protect money. Clients ranged from oligarchs to multinational CEOs. The goal wasn't only to hide money, but to minimize taxes legally. This blurred line between legal avoidance and illegal evasion allowed banks to present themselves as respectable while serving questionable clients. Compliance departments existed, but culture favored discretion. Meanwhile, the Swiss government faced pressure from the United States. In 2009, the U.S. Justice Department targeted UBS for helping Americans hide assets. UBS paid $780 million in fines and handed over thousands of account names. It was a turning point. For the first time, Switzerland's legendary secrecy cracked. Other banks soon faced similar investigations. Credit Suisse later paid $2.6 billion for assisting tax evasion. Publicly, Swiss officials promised reform. Privately, smaller banks and independent wealth managers absorbed clients who fled larger institutions. The empire didn't shrink, it decentralized. This decentralization made enforcement harder. Thousands of small private banks, trust firms, and financial advisors operated across the Swiss system. Some specialized in discrete transfers, others managed front companies. Law enforcement struggled to track the flow. Even as transparency treaties increased, enforcement lagged. Foreign governments had to make precise, case-specific requests, often blocked by technicalities. Without proof, accounts stayed sealed. For many criminals, time worked in their favor. Investigations dragged on until statutes of limitation expired. Technology expanded the empire's reach. Digital banking allowed instant transfers across jurisdictions. Cryptocurrencies added new layers of anonymity. While Swiss banks officially avoided direct involvement in unregulated crypto, many offered services to convert digital assets into fiat, effectively laundering them. The combination of advanced encryption, offshore structures, and legal privacy made tracing funds nearly impossible. Regulators chased paper trails that no longer existed. Dirty money became data, and data moved faster than law. The human cost continued. When billions leave developing nations, public budgets shrink, infrastructure decays, corruption flourishes, citizens lose faith in governance. Yet those responsible live comfortably, protected by international financial law. Swiss banks don't see suffering, they see balance sheets. In Geneva, portfolios rise. In Kinshasa, lights go out. The disconnect is stark but deliberate. The system rewards willful ignorance. The more abstract money becomes, the easier it is to deny consequences. Even European democracies relied on Swiss secrecy. Politicians, CEOs, and celebrities used numbered accounts to hide wealth from tax authorities. The 2015 Swiss Leaks scandal exposed how HSBC's Swiss arm helped thousands evade taxes. The data showed patterns: arms dealers, corrupt officials, sanctioned individuals, all clients. Yet prosecutions were limited. Governments preferred settlements to systemic change. The illusion of accountability persisted while the machinery of concealment remained intact. Swiss policymakers defend banking secrecy as part of privacy rights. They argue individuals deserve protection from intrusive governments. But critics counter that secrecy primarily benefits the wealthy and corrupt. Ordinary citizens don't need numbered accounts in Zurich. They need accountable governance and fair systems. Secrecy doesn't protect freedom, it protects privilege. And the longer it persists, the deeper inequality grows. Over time, Switzerland's reputation has shifted. Once seen as a safe, neutral haven, it's now viewed as a hub of financial opacity. International watchdogs rank it among jurisdictions facilitating tax evasion. Despite reforms, the legacy persists. Centuries of profit from hidden money don't vanish overnight. Each scandal brings promises of change. Each reform closes one door and opens another. The Swiss financial empire evolves, learning to comply just enough to survive. At the center of this empire are not villains, but professionals. Bankers, lawyers, accountants, highly educated, polite, and disciplined. They believe they serve clients, not politics. Yet by building complex structures to obscure ownership, they become architects of corruption's endurance. Every wire transfer routed through a trust, every shell company created, every loophole exploited, they maintain the illusion of legitimacy. The Swiss giant doesn't operate with malice. It operates with precision, efficiency, and indifference. This indifference is the empire's greatest strength. No ideology, no emotion, just process. As long as rules exist, the system adapts to exploit them. If one method becomes illegal, another appears. Transparency is treated as a technical problem, not a moral one. And because profits remain high, incentives never change. The Swiss financial sector contributes nearly 10% of national GDP. Politicians hesitate to disrupt it. Reform always stops short of transformation. The empire on dirty money didn't emerge overnight. It grew quietly, case by case, account by account. It persists because global demand for secrecy hasn't disappeared. From sanctioned oligarchs to tax-averse billionaires, clients still seek safe harbors. As long as wealth concentrates in few hands, the Swiss model endures. Clean image outside, shadow networks inside. You're watching a system built not on gold or goods, but on silence. The reckoning began quietly. Leaks, whistleblowers, and investigative journalists started connecting dots across borders. In 2022, the Swiss Secrets investigation revealed internal records from Credit Suisse showing thousands of clients tied to crime, corruption, and human rights abuses. Among them were drug traffickers, sanctioned politicians, and intelligence operatives. These weren't historical anomalies. Many accounts remained active. The files showed that even after decades of reform promises, Swiss institutions continued serving the same clientele. The story broke globally, but inside Switzerland, outrage was muted. For many citizens, banking secrecy was a matter of national pride. For the rest of the world, it was proof that reform had failed. The leak embarrassed regulators and forced another round of crisis meetings. Politicians vowed transparency. Banks issued press releases promising internal reviews. Yet history suggested these reviews would be narrow. The pattern had repeated too often. Each scandal was treated as isolated, not systemic. When the Panama Papers and Pandora Papers later exposed offshore networks linked to Swiss intermediaries, few were surprised. What shocked observers was the scale. Billions moved through Swiss-controlled trusts and holding companies scattered across the Caribbean and Channel Islands. It showed that the empire wasn't confined to Switzerland. It was global, with Zurich as the command center. Credit Suisse's downfall in 2023 symbolized a turning point. Once one of Europe's most prestigious banks, it collapsed under the weight of scandals, risk mismanagement, and reputational damage. UBS, its longtime rival, absorbed it in an emergency merger backed by the Swiss government. For some, this was poetic justice, a giant undone by its own hubris. For others, it was a warning about the fragility of systems built on opacity. The merger didn't erase history, it consolidated power. Now, one superbank dominated Swiss finance, inheriting both assets and controversies. Behind every collapse are unseen victims. When banks fail, the wealthy lose confidence but recover. The middle class pays through reduced services, slower growth, and higher taxes. Switzerland avoided a domestic crisis, but global partners grew wary. Regulators in the United States and Europe began pushing for stricter anti-money laundering enforcement. The Financial Action Task Force, FATF, flagged weaknesses in Swiss oversight. Transparency advocates demanded public registries of beneficial ownership. Yet the Swiss model resisted full disclosure. Privacy was rebranded as data protection, a more modern defense for the same old secrecy. Technology added new complexity. Artificial intelligence and blockchain analytics improved detection of illicit flows, but they also increased sophistication of concealment. Some Swiss firms began offering compliance tech services to clients, ironically helping them appear transparent while staying opaque. Algorithms generated compliance reports while structuring assets to remain untraceable. The empire adapted, merging traditional secrecy with digital camouflage. Regulators chased innovations they barely understood. Swiss neutrality remains a double-edged sword. It allows the country to serve as a trusted mediator in global diplomacy. But in finance, neutrality becomes a shield for indifference. When Russian oligarchs faced sanctions after the invasion of Ukraine, many shifted assets through Swiss intermediaries. Officially, Switzerland adopted sanctions in line with the EU. In practice, enforcement was selective. Investigators estimated that only a fraction of Russian wealth in Switzerland was frozen. The rest stayed hidden behind complex ownership structures. This inconsistency reinforced perceptions of a system skilled at symbolic compliance but allergic to real accountability. You might wonder why global powers tolerate this. The answer lies in mutual benefit. Swiss banks manage trillions for Western elites. Politicians and corporations use the same mechanisms they condemn publicly. Cracking down too hard risks exposing their own participation. The empire survives not because it is invisible, but because it is entangled with those who might dismantle it. Everyone profits until the next scandal. The Swiss giant thrives in these gray zones, where morality bends to money and legality depends on jurisdiction. Ordinary citizens rarely grasp the scale. When you read about billions disappearing from public budgets or tax havens draining revenue, those numbers feel abstract. But they translate into real consequences. Fewer hospitals, underfunded schools, weaker infrastructure. A study by the Tax Justice Network estimated that global tax evasion costs governments over $400 billion annually. Switzerland plays a key role in that loss. Every hidden dollar is a missed opportunity for development. The empire doesn't steal directly. It enables theft to endure. Inside Switzerland, debate over reform continues. Younger generations question the ethics of profiting from secrecy. Older bankers defend tradition. The government balances moral pressure with economic necessity. The financial sector employs hundreds of thousands and underpins national wealth. Change threatens jobs, influence, and identity. Politicians promise modernization while maintaining the core model. As long as global inequality persists, demand for safe havens remains. The empire's foundation may shift from secrecy to discretion, but the function stays the same. To understand the endurance of the system, look at how language shapes perception. Wealth management sounds respectable. Asset protection implies security. Private banking evokes trust. Yet behind these terms lie practices indistinguishable from those labeled corruption elsewhere. Euphemism sanitizes reality. Clients aren't hiding money, they're optimizing portfolios. Lawyers aren't laundering funds, they're structuring transactions. Accountants aren't enabling evasion, they're advising on efficiency. The Swiss model depends as much on linguistic camouflage as on legal loopholes. You may think this is purely a Swiss problem, but it isn't. The empire exists because global finance rewards opacity. London, New York, Singapore, and Dubai operate their own versions. Switzerland perfected the template. Others followed. The system runs on trust and denial. Trust that institutions act responsibly. Denial when evidence shows otherwise. This is why scandals keep recurring. Every revelation fades, every outrage cools, every reform stalls. The empire adapts, waits, and resumes. Some argue secrecy is dying. Automatic exchange of information between tax authorities, whistleblower leaks, and stricter compliance rules suggest progress. But secrecy doesn't disappear, it migrates. When banks face scrutiny, wealth moves to family offices, art collections, or cryptocurrencies. When names must be disclosed, ownership shifts to proxies. The Swiss learned to innovate concealment. In an economy where information is currency, silence is still the most valuable asset. What does this mean for the future? If history is a guide, the empire won't vanish. It will evolve under pressure. Regulators will tighten laws, banks will adjust, new intermediaries will emerge, dirty money will flow where discretion is greatest. The story of the Swiss giant isn't about villainy. It's about incentives. Systems follow the logic of profit. As long as hiding wealth remains profitable, someone will offer the service. Switzerland just happened to perfect it first. Before we close, tell me in the comments, does your country have strong laws against offshore secrecy? Do you think privacy or transparency should prevail? Your perspective matters because this issue affects everyone, from taxpayers to policymakers. The empire thrives in darkness. Awareness is the first light. The empire's shadow stretches far beyond banking. It shapes geopolitics, foreign aid, and even global justice. When wealth vanishes into offshore accounts, nations lose leverage. Developing countries struggle to collect taxes on natural resources, while elites quietly store profits in Zurich or Geneva. Studies by the IMF show that up to 10% of global GDP is held in tax havens. This concentration of hidden wealth distorts everything from currency values to political stability. Governments depend on loans from institutions like the World Bank, yet much of their potential tax base sits beyond reach. The system is circular. Debt is public. Profit is private. The Swiss giant plays the role of silent broker, helping both sides maintain the illusion of fairness. In the modern era, secrecy doesn't require physical vaults. It relies on digital architecture. Complex shell networks and algorithmic banking platforms move billions with a few clicks. Swiss institutions mastered this transition early. They built secure, encrypted systems marketed as privacy tools, but used for cross-border concealment. Regulators struggle to trace flows that cross dozens of jurisdictions within seconds. Even when exposed, these transfers often fall into legal gray zones. The rules differ across borders, allowing lawyers to argue that no single law was broken. This is how the empire maintains legitimacy, by staying technically legal while undermining intent. Central to this endurance is perception management. Swiss banks spend heavily on reputation campaigns, sponsoring art fairs, sustainability summits, and cultural events. The message is clear. Switzerland equals trust. The more scandals emerge, the more they double down on image. By associating with refinement and neutrality, they distance themselves from the ugliness of corruption. This branding works. Surveys show that many global investors still rank Swiss institutions among the most stable. They view leaks as exceptions, not evidence of design. The empire survives not only on secrecy, but also on credibility. The relationship between Swiss banking and global crises is another recurring theme. During wars, sanctions, and economic meltdowns, Switzerland becomes a safe harbor. Gold from Nazi Germany, oil profits from sanctioned regimes, or reserves fleeing hyperinflation have all found refuge there. This neutrality isn't moral, it's transactional. The system serves whoever pays. Critics argue this approach makes Switzerland complicit in sustaining authoritarian regimes. Supporters claim neutrality prevents bias. In truth, it monetizes conflict. When one side loses, another gains. The bank always wins. Every empire eventually faces a reckoning. For Switzerland, that may come from technology. Blockchain transparency and decentralized finance challenge traditional secrecy. Digital ledgers make ownership traceable in ways banks cannot easily manipulate. But even here, Swiss firms adapt. They now market crypto custody services, blending old discretion with new tools. Regulators worldwide debate how to apply anti-money laundering rules to digital assets. The Swiss position remains consistent. Regulate lightly, attract capital. The empire's logic persists, even when the medium changes. There is also moral fatigue among citizens worldwide. People grow weary of systems where rules differ by wealth. In many countries, anti-corruption movements demand transparency in banking and politics. Whistleblowers, journalists, and activists take significant risks to expose hidden assets. Yet the price of truth is high. Many face lawsuits, exile, or worse. The Swiss legal framework still punishes leaks harshly. Banking secrecy may have softened on paper, but retaliation against exposure remains strong. Silence is enforced not by law alone, but by fear. Despite all this, the Swiss giant remains essential to global finance. Central banks, sovereign funds, and multinational corporations still use its services. The world's monetary system depends on stable, neutral intermediaries. Switzerland provides that neutrality at a cost. This dependency complicates reform. You cannot easily dismantle a pillar of the global system without risking collapse. Policymakers know this, which is why change comes slow. Transparency is praised, secrecy is tolerated, and the cycle continues. You might ask, why does this matter to you? Because the hidden economy shapes the visible one. Every inflation spike, austerity measure, or budget shortfall connects to unseen capital flows. When the wealthy hide wealth, the burden shifts to ordinary taxpayers. When crises hit, governments rescue banks before citizens. These outcomes are not accidents. They reflect priorities embedded in the structure of global finance. Understanding the Swiss model helps you see those priorities clearly. History teaches that empires fall when contradictions become unbearable. For Switzerland, the contradiction lies in promoting trust while enabling deceit. The world accepts this paradox because it benefits from the stability Switzerland provides. But stability built on inequality is temporary. As inequality widens, public pressure intensifies. Digital transparency tools, cross-border data sharing, and investigative journalism erode secrecy. One leak at a time, the myth of innocence cracks. The question isn't if the empire will face accountability, it's when. Still, don't expect a dramatic collapse. The empire's strength lies in adaptation. It has survived wars, sanctions, and global shifts for centuries. It evolves quietly, absorbing shocks. When public anger peaks, it concedes small reforms, then resumes business as usual. This resilience frustrates critics, but fascinates historians. Few systems have maintained influence for so long with so little direct power. The Swiss empire's control comes not from force, but from trust, the most profitable commodity of all. The lesson extends beyond Switzerland. Every nation with a financial hub faces similar temptations. London with its offshore territories, New York with its shadow banking, Singapore with its investment channels, all reflect the same pattern. Secrecy fuels growth, then invites scrutiny, then adapts. The Swiss simply wrote the first manual. Others updated it. If the goal is genuine transparency, reform must be global. Targeting one jurisdiction changes little when others stand ready to fill the void. So what happens next? As global debt climbs and currencies strain, demand for safe havens will rise. The rich seek protection from inflation, taxation, and instability. They will look again to places like Switzerland. The empire will welcome them, as it always has. New laws may demand disclosure.